All right, hello everyone. As we're just gonna wait a couple of seconds as folks filter in. Welcome to our new workshop series here at IDA. It is 2 sessions, 2 presentations, followed by a workshop. And you are here, and it's called Nothing Ventured, Nothing Gained, Getting Started. The title is courtesy of Maria Santos. Thank you for coming up with that. So as we're waiting for everybody to filter in and for us all to get started, it would be wonderful for you to introduce yourself in webinar chat and let us know who you are and where you're joining us from. We are all here, the 3 of us, me, Maria, and Gabriella, in Los Angeles, California, which is unceded Tongva land. All right. Hello, Nancy. Welcome, welcome. Okay. I'm also going to, so the format of this session today is going to be 1 hour of our presentation and then 30 minutes for Q&A. I'm going to go ahead and get started with our presentation section right now. I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see that? Okay, wonderful. So thank you all for joining us, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening. My name is Abby Sun, and I'm the Director of Artist Programs at the International Documentary Association. I am a light-skinned Asian woman with black hair just below shoulder length. It's up in a half ponytail today, and I'm wearing a sleeveless light blue dress. I'm sitting in front of a very blank white wall, as are actually the three of us. And I will be one of your 3 presenters today. Before IDA, I was an independent curator and artist support worker. I've done a lot of festival consultations and distribution consultations for filmmakers, reviewed a lot of grant applications, and at IDA, I am in charge of our industry conference for documentary filmmakers, which is called Getting Real. The next one is in April 2024. And I also edit our print and digital magazine, Documentary Magazine. The title is very inventive. Before we get started with the rest of this presentation, I'd like to really quickly just give you an overview of why we are doing this workshop and series. So at IDA here, we get a lot of questions from filmmakers who are just starting out. They're looking for an overview of how to situate themselves and their projects within our field. These are not usually student filmmakers or people who are picking up a camera for the first time, but people who have a little bit of facility, a little bit of understanding of how to put together a film, but are looking for a broader network of support. So that's the type of audience that this series of workshops and presentations are aimed for. It's aimed at people who are looking to make films independently, whether that is a short, medium length, or feature, and who are also interested in having the film circulate within what we call a market. Now, this market doesn't need to be an actual market, which we will also talk about during this series. Things like project markets, like at Gotham Week or at IDFA Forum, or to be sold to distributors. The market could also be if one wants to operate within a film festival space, or if one wants your documentary film to be picked up by a outlet like the LA Times and put on their website. This is also referring to people who might be more on the art side of our field and want to have your work shown in galleries or museum spaces. Those are all at their core what we consider a type of market. Your film is being evaluated for its value and its worth in a certain context. So those are the types of films that we're talking about today. But before I get started, I'm not here alone today. I have some co-conspirators. All three of us developed this presentation together, and we will be switching off on leading the presentation today. With that, I'd love Maria and Gabriela, maybe starting with Maria, if you could introduce yourself. And I would just say Maria was a wonderful, sorry, I handed that off to you, but Maria is somebody who I've admired in this field for quite a few years. She has a lot of experience in many different organizations that are beloved and well respected for their artist support and artist funding opportunities. Their opportunities, as well as the thinking and the philosophy behind how these decisions are made. Maria comes to us directly from the Sundance Institute last fall, and before that has also worked at CineReach and Array. So thank you, Maria.
Thanks, Abby. I am blushing, but I am tanned, so you can't really see it. Good morning, everyone. My name is Maria Santos. I am a brown-skinned, chubby woman with very long chola black hair. I'm also wearing a patterned dress, and behind me is a white wall. As Abby mentioned, my experience and expertise and my connection to film is really around developing artists, my interest in getting artists to start from a place of an idea and really make it happen. That's where my passion lies. So that takes many forms. It has included certainly working in the funding space, but also in the artist support space, and also in a producing capacity. All three of us actually take on producing roles for our work. So that's a little bit about me. And today, so I'll be passing it off to Gabriela to introduce herself as well.
Hi, I'm Gabriela Ortega Ricketts. I use she, her pronouns. I am a light-skinned Colombian American woman with kind of chin-length brown hair, and I'm wearing a cheetah pattern headband and a kind of orange, black, red striped short sleeve shirt with a black collar. And behind me, you can see this photograph of an Irish pig. And then aside from that, it's a white wall. I am the manager of artist programs at IDA. And I also work as an archival producer. So I kind of have a different producing angle than Abby and Maria do. Yeah, thank you all so much for being here. And I'm really excited to see so many of you in the audience. Abby, do you wanna pick it back up?
Yes, thank you, Gabriela. And I will note that Gabriela has previously developed a workshop on navigating archival sources for IDA. So go to our YouTube page and check that out. It's extraordinarily informative. And she even shares her templates and a lot of tricks of the trade. So before I move on to I just want to say that at any point during this presentation, you can ask us questions. Just use the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And also, here at IDA, accessibility is a large priority of ours. So I want to say a very grateful thank you to our access providers for today, to Rhonda for cart captions, which are available. You can turn them on in your Zoom menu bar. And also to our ASL interpreters, Darcy and Emma. Darcy is on screen right now. Thank you very much, Darcy. All right, so we're going to move right on to the heart of the matter. Here's what we're going to go through today. We're going to address framing and positioning your project, which is a lot. In the registration process, we asked you for what you were hoping to get out of this webinar. And many of you asked this question, so rest assured, we will get to it. We will also talk about how to start building community and support, whether that means financial support or other types of support. We will also, because we believe this is heavily under addressed in our field, talk about mental health and some of our thinking around managing mental health and stress. Overall, I want you to keep in mind that this seminar is about building power for filmmakers. We are not addressing this, we're attempting not to address this issue from a gatekeeping perspective, but more from a gate opening perspective, sharing our knowledge and thinking with you. But we also want to encourage a lot of interaction amongst yourselves in chat. If you have something that you want to add, something that you want to complicate, please put them in chat. We'll be reading them throughout this session, and we really encourage knowledge sharing between you as well. So with that, I'm going to move on. So Maria, let's start from the beginning. How do I frame my project?
Finding my own mute button. Thanks, Abby, for that question. So yes, everyone, we're going to start at the very beginning, which is just how do I contextualize or frame my project? So framing is the context for your film. The context will help you communicate to others what type of film you want to make. So in this section, we'll go over how to use your existing experience with films and filmmaking to better describe your quote unquote first film and what you hope to accomplish with it. Telling people your goals, especially early on, even before development, when they're just a little seedling of an idea, makes folks more willing to offer you support. This is how you'll begin to create a support network for the film, and we'll talk about why that's really important to your film as well. Next slide. So first, think about what you do know. You'll likely want to make a first film because you are already an avid film watcher. You're someone that's always watching films, loves them, or you understand the power of communicating through film. So that's where you start. But everyone has a bit of a different starting place. So when we say quote unquote first film, that can actually mean many different things. And so your first film can be somewhat of a misleading term. So we'd ask you to be more specific when you talk about your first film. Your first film can be the first time you've ever picked up a camera. It can be a student film. It can be a short film, which is very different than making a first feature-length film. Sometimes a first film can even be used like a marketing tool. It can be a sort of calling card for the type of filmmaker you want to be. So it's a means to an end to make a feature. But others actually make shorts throughout their career. So even if this is the intention, you should be clear when you're talking about your first film, what kind of first film you're actually referring to. Because all of these different types of first films need different types of approaches and resources. So it's important to be really clear when communicating to others that you're making your first film, the specific type of film that you're making. I think I've made my point. All right, next slide. So we're going to give you more ways to frame your film. In order to frame your film, you have to describe the types of nonfiction that you will be using in your film. Sometimes these types of nonfiction are actually referred to as formal elements or the form of the film. For example, you'll often hear people say, like, I'm making a verite film or an investigative film, but that doesn't mean that this is the only formal element of nonfiction that will appear within the film, especially if it's a feature-length film. So this is usually the main nonfiction formal element being used within the film, but it's even more helpful when you can name a few of the formal elements being used in your film. So as a little exercise together, trusting the power of the collective and all of the filmmakers in the audience, we're going to drop a link in the chat, and you can see it already sort of working. If you want to go to menti.com and use the code 86995953. There was also a QR code somewhere, but I don't see it. So anybody who wants to go to menti.com 86995953, you can actually start just putting in there all of the types of nonfiction film that you've heard. I see here course, documentary is really big. Observational film is something that usually connotes that you as the filmmaker are purely observing. But contrary to popular belief, it doesn't mean that you're not a participant in what's happening in that scene, right? So purely observational does not necessarily mean that it's objective. I also see here journalism. I see here hybrid. Hybrid usually means that there's fiction and nonfiction elements associated with it. I also see, propaganda. Propaganda nonfiction is very interesting because it sort of connotes an intention behind the film that you're making. I see here self-reflexive, right? Other ways to describe self-reflexive could be like a personal film, something that's really coming from your insides and you're trying to communicate to others. It can also be about a personal experience that you've had. An impact film really talks more about a film that's what's going to happen after the film is made, right? That it can actually be used for advocacy or for some sort of not necessarily political action, but maybe community action in order to get something changed. So the impact of the film after it's made. Thank you all for all of these. We're gonna continue to keep this Mentimeter open throughout the rest of the presentation. So you guys can keep adding more and more types of nonfiction film to this Mentimeter as the time goes on, but we'll take down the slide for now. Just wanted to really show how many ways there are to describe the film that you're making. So thanks everyone for that. All right. Let's see. So another little exercise for all of you, if you are thinking about a film that you're trying to make, is to actually start thinking about the three words that would describe your film. All right. So we can move on to next slide. So other ways to frame your project to describe to others, we also recommend that you set filmmaking goals for yourself and for the film. We don't all make films for the same reason, and not every film you make will have the same goals. So really think about what you hope to accomplish with this first film that you're making. Some goals you may have are to improve your filmmaking skills. So maybe this isn't a film necessarily for audiences, but it's actually you're trying something new out and you'd like for that to be the goal of making this first film. Bring to light a complicated issue. Another goal can be impact policy or understanding of an issue. Again, those impact films, right, are really important for us to use as a way to communicate something that needs impact. You could also want, as one of your goals, to achieve recognition for your filmmaking. Maybe one of your goals is to take it out into festivals and want to receive an award at a festival for this first film that you made. That could be a goal of yours. You could also be experimenting with new film techniques, as we mentioned earlier. You could purely just want to put make your ideas into a reality. You have this idea that's been nagging on you for years and you're ready to make it. That could also be a goal for your next film. And this last one is a little bit of a cheeky comment, but it's true. One of your goals for making your film is to maybe not go into debt. Maybe that is, you want to create a sustainable production, and that is a perfectly legitimate goal. And we'll talk about ways to actually accomplish that. So just finishing out my section, Abby, for further framing, how do I figure out where my film sits in the landscape?
Thanks so much, Maria. This is a really tricky and complicated question. This gives you a preview of what we're going to go through in this section. Essentially, our short answer is research. But in order to do the research, we're going to introduce this idea of the comp. So a comp is our shorthand for a comparison. The way that I like to describe it is to find your comps, to think of a completed film, a film that people would know, that the people that you're talking to would know, that has the type of success that you want it to have. Having a comp is just another way of describing the film that you want to make beyond the formal elements that Maria just walked us through. They're very important for pitching. We'll talk about pitching later as well. And the way to think of a comp is to look for films that might have similarities to one that you want to make in terms of tone, form, length, budget size, the stage of the career that the filmmaker is in for you. It's helpful to have more than one comp to reference. It's helpful to understand where your film in your context differs from the films that might be your comparison. For example, if one is making an environmental documentary, it could be helpful to compare it to Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 9/11, but it also might not be helpful because Michael Moore was already an extraordinarily accomplished filmmaker at that time. That was how the film got into Cannes, for example. So we are going to talk about ways to think of in terms of comps, and then also the research to find comps. Okay. I see a question just popped up in the Q&A box about finding comps. So yes, please keep putting your questions in the Q&A box. We'll try to reference them as we go on, but we will have a 30-minute section at the end. So in terms of comps, one thing to think of is what are the visual references that you would like to convey for your film? You can think of the visual reference or your visual approach as your vehicle of communication for your film. The reason why we think this is really important as something to convey, not just the type of film or your approach like verite or observational or self-reflexive, is because many filmmakers can make films about the same topics with the same approach, but they will never all look the same. So the visual approach of your film is incredibly important for understanding the form of your film and what it's going to actually be like. Depending on your topic, when it comes to finding comps and that are visual references for your film, you might want to find films that have covered this topic before, or that have a similar visual style to what you want to use for your film, even though the topic might not be quite similar to what you want to make the film on. So what are visual references used for? One, they are very, very useful. It's not just an intellectual exercise. The reason that you want to have comps that are visual references is because you can use them in pre-production to understand and communicate to yourself and to your collaborators what type of film you're trying to make visually and sonically. Two, for fundraising, you can communicate your visual reference to people that you're looking to get financial support from. Comps should be a part of any materials you produce, no matter what sector you're or what type of financing or what type of support you are seeking. Comps should be a part of pitch decks, grant proposals, sizzles, elevator pitches, any sort of descriptions or situation that you might find yourself in. So you should take notes. Think about how the visual language of these comps are deployed in the film and what parts seem like they might or might not be useful for you. Another way to think of comps is in the methodology of your film. It's another area in which you will make a lot of decisions as a filmmaker. And at this point, I will also add that comps can change. Your ideas and your decisions around what the visual language and what methodologies you use in your film can change throughout the entire production and post-production cycle of your film. It can be that you intend one thing in pre-production and development, and then as you make the film, things change. So in terms of methodologies, many of these practices have a deep and long methodological tradition in other areas of learning. For example, documentary film is often the history of documentary film is often structured from a point of view that it started in ethnography and in anthropology. That is one field that has used documentary film and documentary film techniques for a long time. But we should keep in mind that there are many traditions that lead to what we could consider documentary films. This includes organizing and labor movements, so on and so forth, theater, art. There are many traditions that we can draw from. So these methodologies don't just affect what you're filming and the prep work ahead of time, but they also affect how you want your film to be understood by others, how you want your film situated when other people are talking about them. They also affect how you record the visual material. So they also affect visual approaches. When we say a broadcast, investigative documentary, we have a certain image in our mind of what the film should look like. But these two things can be separated. Your methodology, such as investigative journalism, can be different from the visual approach. But they do affect, if you want to use a certain tradition, they do affect, for example, how you record interviews, reenactments, animation, how you ask for consent and collaborate with the people in your film. The beauty of documentary films is that, contrary to expectations that documentary films must be a certain thing or that journalism must be a certain thing, in documentary films, there is no one single methodology that you must follow. So we've listed some examples of where you can find different methodologies here. That's the left column. You can pull methodologies from grassroots organizing, performance art, anthropology, sociology, etc. And the practice, how you put it into action on making your film, in the right column, the sample practices, interviews, reenactments, animation. Lastly, in terms of thinking of comps and in terms of thinking about what your film should be, we have a really incredibly important question. Is it a short or is it a feature? This is a question about length. And we like to use a metaphor of thinking about whether you have enough material to write an article versus whether you have enough material to write a book or a novel. So short films are the article, and feature-length film, what I like to term anything over 60 minutes, that's the broadcast hour length, but there are different rules for what is feature length and what is not, depending on different situations. But you can think of it as a long film and a short film, whereas the feature length film is like writing a book. So I will say shorts, as Maria mentioned earlier, it is often a first film and it's often used as a quote unquote calling card. So first films, therefore short films, are often considered today less serious as a format, but I believe that they are really underutilized as a length. Historically, short films also showed in movie theaters. There's a long tradition of filmmakers making documentary shorts in particular, and they played before screenings of commercial feature-length fiction films in theaters. There are still people, as Maria mentioned, working exclusively in the short film form and who find it very serious. But short films, some positives and some characteristics of short films, one funding source can pay for the whole project. They often have a much more contained timeline, meaning shorter timeline, smaller budget, smaller crew size. They usually follow, if the film is narrative, one major narrative thread or one major thematic thread. And unfortunately, they are not likely to get a financial return these days. The distribution pathways for short films have narrowed, but in terms of their utility for you as a filmmaker, they are a good introduction to your visual style, to your filmmaking approach, and to topics of interest. So we really encourage people to not shy away from making short films. Now, the films that many people really want to make that seem to have the length and the weight to suit the seriousness of many topics, the feature length. They are often funded through different multiple sources, especially on the independent side. Going back, they often take years to make. We encourage, if you are working on a feature length, to gather a crew or a group of collaborators to help support you as a filmmaker if you are the director. They do also need a single cohesive visual language to tell the story that might move through several different forms. And most of all, feature-length films require a certain amount of pacing and audience attention sustaining. And because of that, in the length, it might be more challenging to make from a creative standpoint. Going back to the article versus novel or book comparison, feature-length films, again, have enough material to write a novel. Our hot tip, we see many films when it comes to, I see many films when it comes to my job duties, reviewing grant applications and talking to filmmakers. I see many projects that might be better served at the short form length than the feature length. So that's kind of our hot tip to you all. Don't mistake your short for a feature. So again, how do you find comps? There's no simple answer for this. Really, we encourage you to read a lot, to watch a lot, and to listen to a lot. Films have many phases, but we encourage that you start this research at the pre-production phase. A lot of research needs to happen in development. We encourage you to read, listen, watch anything that you can get your hands on that is applicable to your film. And again, stressing that it's not just about the content and the topic of your film, but also to think about how you want to make a film. I will just say, even as an experienced, I often see experienced filmmakers go on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, and they will post things like, hey, I'm interested in watching films about XYZ, or I'm interested in watching films that use this very specific technique because I'm thinking about how to make my own film around that. This might be anything from, hey, I'm interested in watching films that where in the talking head interview, the person who is being interviewed stares straight into the camera as opposed to talking to somebody off to the side. Or I'm interested in watching films that use diaries and written materials in unique and interesting ways. I see people ask these questions all the time, and those are filmmakers doing the research in order to find comps for their film. And those are things that you can also do as well. All right, I see some questions in the chat about what if you can't, I'm gonna just address one question from Simon. What if you can't think of any comps that are particularly similar to your film? And so that's what I would suggest actually, is to post on social media, go to forums full of documentary filmmakers such as the D Word and ask your question there. Because if you don't know, other people surely with the community, the super generous community that we have, will know. All right. So now that we have talked about comps and research for developing your film, we're going to move on to talking about actually building some support for this film project. Maria, how do I build community and support?
Thanks, Abby. Thanks for all of that. Yes, so just to say that all of this framing conversation is context, again, that will help you be clear with others about what your intentions are of what has yet to be made and help others actually be invested in seeing that the film come to fruition. Filmmaking is a collaborative endeavor, even when there is only one director. You can't, or I guess we really recommend that you don't do it alone. It is a community building and support network is imperative to creating a sustainable workflow and making a piece of art that can communicate with ample audiences. Again, we are specifically talking about independently funded first films that can be considered products in a marketplace. So there are a variety of ways to build community and support, but we would like to start with your collaborators, such as your crew, including producers, and then we'll also go on to talk about consultants and funders as a support network. Next slide. So your crew, the first community to consider is your crew. You may be able to hire them, even if it's just 1 or 2 people. These are the folks that will be invested in the success and creative direction of the project. Their profiles and expertise can often raise the value of a project and can also provide an internal soundboard for your creative decisions. So we'll talk about looking for funding tomorrow, but there's certainly a decision to be made when it comes to hiring crew. Though you could film your own project and do your own sound, it's often more manageable, artistically rigorous, and creatively generative to hire out these positions and focus on the directing and or producing, whatever your main role may be. These other positions come with their own expertise, so it's sometimes worth looking for the funding to allow yourself and your project to have a more robust crew. So positions that you may be looking to hire, as listed on the slide, are cinematography, fundraising, usually that's a producer. Editing, again, you could have the skills to edit alone, but it would be great if you had another creative partner in the post process. You could also hire out for graphics. Sometimes this means just the graphics of the end credits, but sometimes it means something more dynamic and part of your visual approach for the film. You also oftentimes are hiring out for sound design and mixing at the end after post. When you've locked picture. And then you may also want to hire out for accessibility needs. More and more we are seeing that crews are becoming more accessible, just different ways of working. And so you may want to find someone with an expertise in order to diversify your crew and allow different types of individuals to be a part of it. And then also make the film accessible to audiences. So there are folks out there who have an expertise in audio description or other types of accessibility not departments, but accessibility expertises that can actually help to broaden the audience for your film. So let's talk about specifically the values of producers on first films in the next slide. So the producing responsibilities will exist whether or not you choose to hire this position. So just to be really clear, if you, the director, if I'm talking directly to the director, if you do not hire a producer, most of the producing responsibilities will fall to you. So a producer can actually add, in addition to helping with some of those producing responsibilities, a producer can add perspective to the film. They can be a soundboard. This position can support you creatively and logistically, and depending on how you set up this relationship, they may even absolve you of some of the responsibilities like fundraising and production logistics. So producers can add knowledge, sensitivity, or connection to the community. Sometimes you're making a film about a community that you're not a part of. Adding a producer to your crew from that community that is being portrayed can be helpful for many reasons. It can help to ensure that the production decisions are being made with someone from the community, considering all of the needs of that community. They can also help to execute the production logistics better than you, right? If they know that community, then they may know the location, they may know the land, they may know some of those like unsaid nuances that sometimes when you come into a community you may not know. So a producer can be very helpful in that. They can also provide creative feedback. Making films can feel daunting at times, and sharing work before it's ready to show can leave you in a very vulnerable position. So producers tend to be the folks who you can turn to for advice solving when you're not really sharing out your work yet. Producers can also add complementary skills. Maybe you're somebody that has great skills in talking to people or doing interviews or getting trust from the folks who are participating in your film, but maybe you're not great at spreadsheets. You're not great at calendaring. You're not great at the Excels, right? So you may want to hire a whiz who just loves spreadsheets, and that way you can become sort of a unified team and really depend on each other's skills. Another thing that a producer can add is experience in the field. It's a little tricky, right? You may want a producer who has more experience if you're making your first film. They can bring connections and knowledge to the collaboration, but these individuals tend to cost more money to hire, rightly so. They have worked really hard to sort of make it to that place in their careers. But if you're a first-time filmmaker, that may not be what you have the budget for. So you may want to consider partnering with a producer with less experience who may not cost you as much, but is willing to learn with you. They're willing to take the journey with you. So first or second-time producers are often motivated to be very resourceful and are also looking to have a successful project that will build up their credits. So there are pros and cons as to whether or not you choose to work with an experienced or a non-experienced producer, but we do recommend that you at least take the moment to see if that's something that can resource your production. All right. I'm seeing that the chat is hot, but I'm not looking at it just yet. We'll continue going, and then I'll see if there are any questions to pull up. All right. So then we can move on to talking about outside of our crew, consultants who can both be informal and formal. Talk about those individuals who are close to the production, but maybe not officially hired by the production. These individuals who may care about you or your film based on the topic and or an investment in you or your crew as artists and makers. So you can consider informal consultants to be colleagues, mentors / advisors, protagonists. Protagonists is an interesting category, right? Because sometimes protagonists become more than just informal consultants. Sometimes they're really dictating what's happening in the story. They are workshopping with you how they want to be seen on screen and everything like that. So at that point, they may become a more formal consultant. And that's just something that you're going to have to work out with the protagonist. But if you see that they are taking on more work than just being in a one-off situation, you may want to consider what it means to fairly compensate them for the creative value they're adding to the film. And then community connections can also be an informal type of consultant. And funders can also be a type of consultant. We'll touch upon this a little bit later, but truly your funders, the folks who are administrating the grants, folks like me, are really invested in making sure that your film gets made. So I become sort of an informal consultant to a lot of the productions that we grant out to. And then friends. I know that film nerds love film nerds. We all love watching films together. So friends can actually be informal consultants as well. And in addition to that, many filmmaking professionals know that this is a collaborative industry and are often willing to help informally or give advice because they've been there and they've had very little budget as well. So it's up to you to actually be ready to receive the knowledge and have a clear framing for your film, as we've talked about, and really be clear about what your goals are so that those folks can also be ready to give you the advice when it comes to that. And it's also important to list out these categories explicitly to remind you that you're not making this alone. You and your crew may be more explicitly in the production, but there are other stakeholders outside of the makers. These folks can make up the community and support for the film. And in fact, it's actually common practice. And we think it's good practice to list out these folks in like a special thanks at the end in the credits, just to acknowledge how many people came together to really make this possible. And so if we move to the next slide, we'll talk more about formal consultants. So formal consultants should usually be paid unless there's a very specific reason why they wouldn't be. But formal consultants are really consulting for the project and should be compensated as such. And they can be hired to do grant writing. Maybe you're looking to apply for a grant that you feel like will be pivotal for the project, and you may want to invest in hiring someone else to do the grant writing. Story scripting can also be a part of this. And you can also hire for editing. Sometimes you just want a one-off, you just want to have someone watch the cut and actually consult on that particular cut and see if you can get it to the next place. So you can hire a formal consultant just for editing one discrete thing, or else they would be hired as an actual crew member. You can also hire formal consultants for fact checking. You can hire them for providing context for the topic. Sometimes you work with expert academics or community members who are really experts in what you are covering. And so you may not necessarily feature them in the film visually or feature their voice, but they are formal consultants that are sharing knowledge with you. So those folks should be paid as well. Budget creation and edits to the budget. You can also hire out for that, distribution strategy, etc. So there are many discrete moments where you may find helpful to get an expert to actually work on the production for one discrete thing. All right, and then our last slide in building community and support. If you go to the next slide, it's actually about fundraising as building community. Oftentimes, folks don't think about funders as community, because we sometimes carry this this power dynamic, right, where we're administrating the funds and you all are applying for the funds. But once a grant has been given, I really consider myself a collaborator with all of our grantees. So we are giving out the funds, but also we are invested in making sure that the film gets to a successful place and that the filmmakers are meeting their goals. So we really want to think about every time you apply for a fund, and even don't get it, you want to think about those funders as community members. Didn't get the fund this time, maybe your project wasn't right for that particular fund, but that funder might know, oh, there's another fund that might be right for your project, or maybe they can help you develop the application or the film in a way that then makes you well positioned for the next fund that you apply. So really think about all of those relationships as opportunities for you to keep building out your film. And so we actually made a handout of all the different types of funding sources that you can source, and we'll actually be dropping it in the chat. But it's not something we're going to go over today. We're actually going to go over it tomorrow. So it's just a little preview. If you want to take a look at the different types of funding sources, there's a list of like pros and cons, but we'll go over it tomorrow. And so I will pass it on to Gabriella, because Gabriella, this all sounds very hard. What about my mental health?
Ooh, that is a really, really great question, Maria. What do we do about our mental health? So in this section, we're going to go through a few things, because this is a huge question that we hear from filmmakers a lot. There are so many different stressors affecting documentary filmmakers and participants alike, and we want to provide some resources that we've pulled for you. Because this is such an important topic, we'll also be covering some of it tomorrow. Obviously, as we all know, there are so many barriers for documentary filmmakers, and a lot of challenges that we encounter, from, unstable employment, maybe lack of funding, and maybe dealing with some really heavy topics in our films. But, I think slowly awareness is growing for how much documentary filmmakers are experiencing burnout, depression, and the like. There's no perfect answer to this question, but we are going to offer some suggestions and share some resources, again, that we've pulled together to kind of hopefully provide a little guidance. So next slide, please. So one of the things that we encounter is that support and timelines are intermittent. So you can't actually really rush through this process. There's a lot of hurry up and wait, and a lot of unknowns going into filmmaking. But some things that you can expect are to expect the unexpected, which unfortunately is very vague in some ways. But things are always going to pop up, and things are always going to get in your way or go wrong, or sometimes go right, hopefully, that you just don't know. So I think mentally preparing yourself for those unexpected things and knowing that they're going to happen can really help you when they do happen. So working on under non-linear timelines, with documentary especially, it's not always going to be you do all your filming, you do all your editing, and then you do all your post. A lot of times these all happen at the same time, and depending on funding, you might have to you might have specific times where you shoot, and then you don't have as much funding, so then you have to spend some time editing because that's all you can afford for that moment, or you go back to the drawing board with some things. It's a constantly evolving process, and so knowing that going in, I think, is also really helpful. Working towards a deadline and then taking breaks is really, really important. I think as filmmakers who have so much stress, and of so many just working to make ends meet while you're making the film, trying to find funding for the film, it's really important to take a break and rest when you can. It's kind of scary, I think, not to keep pushing, but you have to prevent burnout and really take care of yourself also. There will be more work. There will be, things will come again. So when you have those pauses, don't be hard on yourself. Do your best to not feel like you have to be doing something. Please take advantage of that. And these are also you should set for yourself, not only for yourself, but also for your crew and maybe your participants. And when you work with participants, remember that you are dealing with like real three-dimensional people. They have their own lives, they have their own objectives, they have their own traumas that they're dealing with, maybe that they're going to bring to the project, or that the film will, bring up for them. And so really staying with them, I think, is, and checking in with them to see how they're doing, will really, just keeping that in mind as you move forward will, I think, help create a mentally healthy workspace, hopefully, as you make your film. All right. Next slide, please. All right. So to kind of, work with these things that you can expect, we recommend creating a grants calendar and a production calendar. The grants calendar being when grants open, when the deadlines are, maybe when you think you can expect to hear from them. And then also a production calendar that's realistic of, based on the funding that you have or the time that you have, when you will be able to shoot, when you will be able to edit. But really keep in mind that you don't always have to push yourself to pack everything in and come back to resting and taking breaks. Create a contingency plan for those unexpected things. If things go wrong, if you think something could go wrong on a certain shoot or with something, create a backup plan. This is really going to help you, in those moments of high stress, having something else that you can pivot to. Create downtime task lists. So when you do have the downtime and you are resting, it's also a time maybe to keep thinking, and think about what else you can accomplish in those moments, or when you get back to things. Just make lists of other things that come to mind, of what you want to work on. As we all know, filmmaking, especially documentary filmmaking, is not sustainable as a career. And so probably you're going to have to support yourself through side gigs, or maybe you have a full-time job and you're making a documentary on top of that. As you make your film, you're going to have to go through many production pauses. So, you know, and during those production pauses, you can do side gigs or pick up other freelance work. But of course, all of this is going to create a lot of financial stress, just kind of the uncertainty of it. So finding those other avenues of employment will hopefully alleviate some of that. All right, next slide, please. So we're going to be sharing in the chat another handout of mental health resources for everybody that Maria put together. We will be going into this more in depth tomorrow. So come back tomorrow for much, much more information. But I encourage you, when you go through this, to click through, do your research on what all of these organizations and links are. These are a lot of documentary, like, specific and just film specific, and you know, not all of them are, but just resources into places that deal with you know, mental health and navigating burnout in the entertainment industry. All right, I think that's it for our slideshow, and now we can open it up to all of these questions we've been getting. And remember, as we continue, you know, our Q&A section for the next 30 or so minutes, to keep putting your questions in the Q&A box. Abby, do you want to get started?
Yeah, so thank you everybody for the very, very healthy and lively chat that we have. We have been putting links into chat for all of the handouts that we mentioned today, but we will also be sending them to you in an email afterwards. So if you are too busy reading the chat because of all of the wonderful comp suggestions that folks are putting in there, maybe take those notes. Because we won't be sharing the chat with everyone, but we will be sharing all of the resources that we are doing sharing today. So don't worry about bookmarking those. You will receive an email. Okay, that being said, continue to put your questions into the Q&A as we for the next half an hour, but we have some really, really wonderful questions already. And I guess I'm just going to pick a few. We'll try to get all of them, get through all of them. Right now we have enough time to do so. And so let's start with, basically, there's a couple of questions about kind of categories and framing. So we have a question from Nancy. I'm making a 60-minute or so doc feature. Do I call it a short? And then also from Kinsuki, can I frame individual episodes of a series as a feature or short, particularly when applying to grants and festivals? Kind of have two similar questions. Would anyone here like to take that on?
I can answer to the best of my ability. So something that Abby said, which is important, is different programs or different folks will have a different idea of what a feature length is. So for us, it was really important to describe what is a short and what is a feature separate from specific length, because it really does depend on the program itself. So for example, for Enterprise Fund, we consider anything over 40 minutes a feature, but that may be different from if you're talking to a broadcaster who may require the 53, 54 minutes in order to make room for commercials during a 60-minute window, right? So it really depends on what it is that you're using it for and how you want to describe the film in terms of whether you call it a short or a feature. And then in terms of, can I frame individual episodes of a series as a feature or a short, particularly when applying to grants and festivals? It's something that I guess you can absolutely do, and folks have. framed a single episode as a feature in some of our applications for feature-length films. This is perfectly fine with the caveat that some programs may be more strict about this than others. So some programs may explicitly say they're not going to fund a series and they're not even going to fund one episode within a series. So you want to be really careful with those programs that are more strict. For our feature-length fund, we had been accepting as long as it was a feature length episode. So again, over 40 minutes for this particular fund, we were allowing episodes to apply as feature length films. So it really, really depends specifically on that program and making sure that you're doing that research in order to find out these contexts for those things. So unfortunately, it's sort of a case-by-case basis.
Thank you, Maria. I completely agree with that. I think it depends on the context in which you are talking about. The film, if you are, I would just be aware that if it is a situation where you are pitching or seeking financial support, if you are not upfront about your intentions for the final product, that you are not just making a single short, but you're intending on it being a series, that if greenlit or approved, there needs to be a lot of communication that happens. So I would, no matter what you frame things as, I would be upfront about your ultimate intentions. Okay, thank you. We're getting lots more questions in chat. There's a couple that are a little bit more advanced, but I think we can address them here in terms of kind of production dynamics and dynamics on collaborating and on crew, things like that. So I have a question from an anonymous attendee. So yes, you can ask questions anonymously if you would like. I'm wondering, what are the differences of producer and co-producer? I walk into a project when it's in late stage of production, it's already shooting, and it has attached a producer, but with no experience. I'm working on getting international funds for the project. Should I ask for producer title or co-producer? That's one question. There also is a question, I just received funds for a short doc I'm producing, and I have a co-producer that wants to spend the money differently than I do. How do you recommend I handle that? So these are questions kind of about dynamics, what to do when you're in a little bit of a tricky situation already with collaborators. One sounds like a for-hire project, the other one's not quite sure what the context is. I'm going to take just a super short, quick stab at this. So in terms of the first question, which is about crediting, I linked in the Q&A box, which you can all see, a link to the Documentary Producers Alliance's crediting guidelines. So based off of, I would say, the length of time that you are working on the project and kind of your own amount of input, that would actually determine the difference between the co-producer and the producer credit. Are you doing things other than writing applications for international funds and making connections in that way? What is the size of the funding that you are securing for the project, and how important is it for the continued development of that project? Those are all things that differentiate the co-producer and the producer credit, and the DPA's crediting guidelines outlines it quite clearly. That's also a PDF that you can reference when you are in conversations with the team as well, to say that these are published guidelines from a group of very experienced producers for what they recommend. In terms of the question on how to negotiate spending funds, this is actually why we believe that having a clear budget from the beginning and a clear plan is very, very useful. It helps get people on the same page. It sounds like you are not on the same page. I guess I'm not sure kind of what the hierarchy in this situation is, but really it sounds like it's time for a really hard conversation between all of the producers on that team. I would urge you to think about what might be able to unlock more financing for later. It sounds like there's a disagreement because this project is not fully funded, and I would maybe advise you to think about what can you do that can help unlock full financing for the future, so that the things that everybody wants to spend money on are able to be resourced. Maria and Gabriela, anything you want to add to those questions?
No, I think as you mentioned, the DPA guidelines that they put a lot of thought and work into are really it's a really great resource. So definitely check that out. And be mindful again of the scope of work that you're doing. As Abby said, that's it.
Okay. I'm going to, so there are some, okay, now there are so many questions. I'm just going to start from the top. All right. So Tivoli, I kept this question here because there's a little bit of a nuance to it. How do you come up with comps for short films, which can be harder to find, and find out what the budget was? Super quickly, so we have sort of modeled how you can ask for help with finding comps. One thing I want to add is oftentimes, but especially for short films that are not distributed widely, I really encourage you to reach out to the filmmaker, especially if they have their, email address published on their website, or they have a social media account, to just DM them and to ask them, tell them you're a filmmaker doing research on your film and you would really like to watch this film. You can watch, there's so many filmmakers from the small to the very, very established who will give out confidential screener links to their films to whoever asks. Of course, we encourage you not to betray their trust and don't, post their film on YouTube afterwards. This is a system built on trust. It's the same thing with the budget. You can just ask filmmakers, and many of them will have been asked that question before, and they will be happy to share it with you privately, and if not, they will just ignore you or say no. So there's no harm to asking about budgets. And hopefully with documentary.org and our resources, we do have events occasionally called Here's What Really Happened, which are for filmmakers only, in which we bring in very extremely established filmmakers to talk about the budget and how they put together their films, things like that. Okay.
I would just like to say one more thing, which I said in the chat, but we are going to cover budgeting a little more tomorrow. So come back tomorrow for kind of more tips on that.
Yes. And what we will say tomorrow actually is also that we do have a budgeting 101 guide on the IDA website. And so we will be talking more about that as well. Okay. Jay's question. I have a question specifically around similarities in budget. Do you all have okay, so this is actually what I just answered. Do you all have a source website archive whereby I can get info around documentary budgets? So we don't have an archive of documentary budgets that you can look up, but our budget template on the IDA website, which I will put into chat after I answer this question, does have a sample budget template that was developed by the documentary filmmaker and producer Robert Behar. It is from 2019, so I will warn that the industry rates that are listed there are a little bit out of date, but they're not too far off. But this is for a documentary that has funding. That's what I will say. If you are working in the ultra low budget or first time filmmaker realm, it may not be useful for you to use immediately, but it's useful information to understand what it would be when it comes to industry rates. And we will also talk about budgeting and how we advise that you structure a budget, even if you have no funding, outside financing right now, tomorrow. Okay. I'm going to actually go down to a interesting question from Ryan. I'm directing my first documentary feature that follows a Forrest Gump type figure whose life spans almost 9 decades across 2 countries and many industries. I want to lean into the eras as we progress through his story, black and white in the 1940s, retro vibes in the 60s, but also want to make sure that I have a cohesive visual style. Any advice on creating this overall cohesive style while allowing for visual diversity throughout? I'd love to hear from folks in chat too, if you have any suggestions for films that you think might be interesting visual references. But Maria, Gabriella, any advice?
Sure. I mean, I think yeah, that's a lot of different things that you're covering, but I think it comes back to the question of what type of film do you want to make? Is it going to, I would assume you're going to have a lot of archival footage in there. And you can find archival footage. Just a little plug for my workshop, which has a lot of information on that. You can find archival footage from all eras that is kind of aesthetically similar while also being unique in itself. And if you're supplementing with, I've worked on films that have archival footage, but then there are some blank spots. So they used animation that kind of fit in with all the archival footage. So animation's expensive, archival footage is expensive. So these are things to keep in mind. But I think there are a lot of options in the animation, the archival world, and looking at comps of similar things, I think is also really helpful. And when you look at the comps, if there's something that, look at the credits of the comps, you can find archival sources in there, animators, other things. The credits are super revealing also for like finding your crew that you like, for instance. And again, all of these questions really come down to the community as well, of asking other filmmakers for recommendations, other filmmakers for, their solutions to things. But yeah, again, research, community, those are relevant themes that will be coming up again and again as you embark on this journey. Maria, you're nodding. Do you have anything to add?
I'll just add my little plug about editors. Like, this 120% sounds like a question for an editor, and which is why we often really suggest that you do hire an editor. This is basically the approach that they have. It's like, how do they make a feature-length film cohesive with its ebbs and flows emotionally? How do you sustain a feature length? So anyway, just to say, editors would be really key for figuring out what your visual language will be for the film.
I would also thank you, Gabriella and Maria. And I would say in that question, I appreciate what you're trying to do in the film, but remember, like, simplicity is often key. Yeah. Okay. I see 2 questions here. Can you provide a range of what a producer should be paid for a short doc or feature? And how much should you pay yourself as the director from the budget for a short or feature? We will get into this tomorrow, so I'm going to actually table this question, but the short answer is should is actually quite difficult without knowing kind of what context or what you want to do with the film. Should could be anywhere from $0 if it's a collaborative passion project, everybody is deferring their fees, to if it's a for hire project and it's being fully funded by Netflix, I mean, everybody should be paid top of the line. So should is actually quite difficult, but we'll get into those nuances tomorrow. I have a question. I think, Maria, I'd love to hear your advice on this from Faith. What is the best way to find people to be part of the crew?
Yeah, so I mean, we've been talking about this sort of informally, like, it could be in the chat right here, right now. It also, I think Gabriella mentioned this, it's just if you're looking at work that you've seen, even in shorts, where you really like someone's cinematography or you really like someone's sound, look at those credits, and see what they're working on. Also, like, there are different networking sort of opportunities where you're maybe going to watch a movie, and then the folks who stay afterwards are sometimes the film lovers, right? And then you just get to know different people. I think more than where to find, because people are all around, people who love film are all around. It's more just being ready again with those goals that you have for yourself. Like, what type of cinematographer are you looking for? Are you looking for a cinematographer who's very good at observational or is very good at working with people? And so then once you start putting that out and saying that out loud to other people, they may start generating sort of a list for you, like, of suggesting names, just like we're doing in the chat. Like, we're doing it right now in the chat, basically, to say, like, I'm really looking for an editor who can work with archival and present day footage all at once, right? And so then other folks can start to recommend those people, or even if they don't necessarily have like a resume behind them, right? I can know some up and coming editors or cinematographers that might be interested in the film that you're trying to make. It all really is about just like community building, but being really clear about what your goals are.
Gabrielle, anything you'd like to add? Yeah, so thank you, Maria. That actually leads me to, I see a question at the bottom. This webinar has super cool people in the chat. Is there a way to connect us all afterwards? So we will not be sending out an email with all of your contact information because we have not gotten that permission from you all. But as Maria said, you all actually, I didn't say this at the beginning, but you all have the ability to privately chat with each other in this webinar. So if you really want to stay connected with somebody, I encourage you to just send them a private message in chat and ask for their contact information, for their email address. In addition, there are people in the chat who are here. There are actually some quite experienced folks who have been answering questions in chat, who also won artist support and artist development programs at other organizations. Thank you very much for being such active, engaged members of our community. I think it just demonstrates how generous everybody is in documentary film. So I will say many of them, like me, we have email addresses that are public. I actually have my email address on my Twitter profile, all of that. You would be surprised how few emails I get from filmmakers asking questions, to the point where I actually have time answering all of them. So I encourage you to just do a quick Google, reach out to people. If they have time, they will give you some of their time. In addition, you can use things like, if you are an IDA member, I'm just giving a really quick plug for our own organization right now. We have a member directory. And that is a way many people, including Oscar nominated and Oscar winning filmmakers and producers, actually have their email addresses published in our member directory. And you would be surprised how few emails they also get from filmmakers asking them help, to the point where, you know, I've heard from filmmakers, yes, I met this person at a screening, and then they had an hour-long conversation with me about my own film project. And these are people who went to the Oscars like last year. Yeah, so there are also, if you're looking for hiring or just meeting people, there are also crew lists online. Organizations like Brown Girls Doc Mafia and the BIPOC documentary editors group all have lists of people, and they have kind of a relay message system where you can send them a message asking for a conversation, so on and so forth. Gabriella?
Yeah, I also wanted to add, just like on that note, documentary filmmakers, like, we're all in this together. We know that this is like a tough industry to be in, and we've all faced a lot of similar issues. And I find that people, as Abby said, are generally willing to help, because, you know, they get it.
All right. Now I see plenty of people sharing their email addresses in chat. You can do that. I will just note that you are all sharing it publicly, which we also encourage, but you can also do a private message too if you would not like to be public.
Looks like someone put a Discord in the chat.
Yeah, we love Discord. I
Love
just want to
Discord.
use it more. Yeah. All right, we're gonna get back to some questions. I'm just trying to get to some folks who may not have asked a question yet. Okay. From Eric, I have a question. I'm towards the end of principal photography on my first feature documentary. I've made several short docs in the past and have been going it mostly alone. I'm thinking of cutting together a trailer to help raise funds for post-production. Any guidance on if this is generally a sound idea? Gabriella or Maria?
I can take this. I actually was really interested in your project, in your question, just because I think it's about making clear why it is that you want to make a trailer. And so like in service to what? Is it to show other crew members, like other potential crew members, in order to show them what type of film you're making? Or would it be for more fundraising in order to be able to pay for the crew that you're hoping to have as your collaborator? So definitely makes sense that you're towards the end of principal photography and you may want to create a trailer, though I would say for a lot of funders, it's actually more helpful to get, usually trailers are created when you're in development, when you don't yet exactly have shot what you need. So if you're actually towards the end of principal photography, what I'd actually recommend is that you cut a scene as a work sample in order to show funders. Because that will more accurately sort of show what kind of visual approach you're taking and what kind of editing style you're taking. So I think you might be a little bit more advanced than a trailer. But if your question is about actually hiring an editor or hiring crew to support you during post-production, then sure, you might want to create a trailer in order to show that to other crew. But before you make the trailer, I think it's just asking yourself, like, what is the function of that trailer? So that, because maybe you may not need it if you can just show a work sample to other crew members or other funders. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful answer, Maria. Again, it's all about context and what it's being used for. I would add to that very few documentaries get financing based solely off of a sizzle that is trailer length. We're talking the 2 to 3 minute range. You hear the unicorns, you hear stories like this documentary was picked up by Amazon off of a 3-minute trailer and they got $2 million for the documentary. That is a thing that really happened. It is extraordinarily rare. And it only happens once every couple of years. Even if you are trying to get your foot in the door with a production company that might finance the project, or in a pitch with a streamer or broadcaster, they're always going to ask for a longer work sample, even if the shorter video material is what gets you a meeting, because they won't make any decisions if you are at the end of principal photography off of solely a trailer in 99.9% of the cases. So the answer would be yes, and for me. All right, we have an interesting question from Georgie. Any advice on how to position a film in pitching that is a more international story or not rooted in your country? E.g., some funders, particularly in the UK, are always keen on films that speak to the local audience, and Netflix is pivoting away from a local for global strategy back to a more local for local approach. This is a great question. It actually uses several industry terms. So you will hear local for local, local for global, global for global, those sort of terms. And basically the first word is just what is the relationship of the film's subject matter to its audience. And then the second word is what is the kind of geographic spread of the intended audience. And these are words that are used to denote kind of scope and scale of a project. This is why you often hear filmmakers complaining about super local projects not being considered universal or considered appealing universally. So the idea being, example, for a UK-based market, you need a UK-based story, or it's not going, that would be local for local in the business approach in terms of acquisitions for that company. Oftentimes you will hear acquisition executives use these terms, and that's what they mean. It tells you what and where the content they are looking for should be coming from. Okay, that being said, actually in the philanthropy and in the foundation and grants world in which we operate here at IDA, we're actually seeing a shift to local for global. We are seeing a lot more funders, including us at IDA, being very interested in supporting projects that are not from, like, for example, here at IDA, we are making our funds more international than ever and are not requiring a local US co-producer in order to receive our support. In fact, I would say the more specific your project is from whatever locality it is, the better. So in terms of how to position your project, if you have a project that is not, it's an international story for you, I would consider two things. I would consider what is your connection to the communities or communities that you are filming. Is there, how are you kind of expressing your positionality? And then also I would, again, if that's the type of story or that's the type of project that you are really committed to, find a funder that will support that vision. You don't have to go to Netflix if they're pivoting away from these things. There are other places that actually are looking exactly for these stories. That's kind of what I will leave you with. Maria and Gabriella, is there anything that you'd like to add? Okay. All right.
I have a question from Fareed Ahmad. When is the best time to set a methodology for a feature film project? How can I mention or describe the methodology in a grant application process? I can respond to that. The methodology for a feature film project, it's something that you should begin thinking as you are thinking about your idea, right? So if you have this idea of how you want to cover it, process through which you will do your research, or the process through which you will investigate whatever query your film is answering, that's when you should start thinking about methodology. And in most grant applications, actually, there is a very specific place for methodology. It's usually called your artistic approach. Other applications will call it something different, but because, right, we are evaluating applications based on something that hasn't been made yet, we will absolutely give space for you to talk about your methodology, the types of nonfiction form you're using, right? All in sort of written materials, because we have yet to see the actual work. And then sometimes you can actually point to your methodology in the work sample that you're using. So there's plenty of space in order to create your methodology. And then I think something that we mentioned, or Abby mentioned earlier, is that your methodology can change. That's just something that happens sometimes. You're making the film and then you see that that's not actually, the methodology you chose is not actually working. You can pivot away from that. And then, you know, you'd have to adapt your application materials to fit this new approach. But that's why filmmaking is to all of the various needs that can come up for the film. Shall we go to a next one?
Yes, we're gonna try, we have like 1 minute left, so maybe if we can do lightning round, a couple minutes of questions, super short. Is there any specific grant system or way to find funding for an animated documentary? I'm going to lightning round this. We have at IDA a grants directory of over 500 different grants that include filters. You can search by categories and for what they are looking for. And I'm literally looking this up right now on my second monitor. I'm going to put a link into chat so you can look that up yourself. All right. Any suggestions on the best way to reach financiers, private investors? This is a really big topic. We won't have time to get into this even tomorrow, but my advice is if you're looking for private investors or private donors, and those are two really, really different things, we will go over the differences tomorrow. But you really have to think, if you're looking for investors, you have to think of your film as a business. So you can also do things. For example, you can do loan financing and debt financing. You can finance your film as a business. If you have a pre-sale already, you can kind of use that as collateral and get debt financing for it. There are all these kind of interesting strategies. You're not reliant on knowing a person. Part of it might be coming up with a business plan and presenting it to a bank for a business loan. So I'm just going to add that in there. Super quickly, will we be getting into how to create community for the film on social media platforms and doing a fundraising campaign? We will not be addressing this. This to me is kind of like super far down the line, but we do have a video on the IDA YouTube channel that addresses, there's another question about crowdfunding. We have a crowdfunding how-to, and that will actually also be linked from that's linked from the funding sources handout, so you can take a look at that. Do you recommend to start a feature-length doc by making a short film, then get funds for the feature? Does anyone want to try to answer this in one sentence?
Briefly, the answer is I wouldn't recommend it. Some folks certainly do it, but what we're really trying to impress upon everyone is that shorts are definitely a different vehicle than feature length films. So sometimes when you create a short, once it's out in the world and you've premiered it and people see that short, right, then they have an idea of what the topic is, the characters already. And so if you're trying to create a feature-length film, that feature-length film has to have a reason why it's going to take up even more space than the short did, right? It has to have a reason why it's being expanded. Maybe you're introducing new characters, maybe you're introducing a new approach to the topic, but it shouldn't just be more of the same. It shouldn't be just more interviews of the same characters or more footage of the same images, right? Because then all you're doing is just fluffing up more of that intellectual property of what was the short. So you really want to rethink what it means to expand a short into a feature. Folks have done it and absolutely made two beautiful projects, but it isn't as easy as just saying we're going to do more of the same in order to create more length between a short and a feature.
All right. Thank you very much, Maria. And I know we still have almost 20 questions that we were not able to get to. So we apologize for that. We are so appreciative and grateful for all of your enthusiasm, but we are going to close out for today because we are at the end of our time and we're at the end of the time for our access providers as well. We are doing the second part of this presentation, and which will be followed by another 30-minute Q&A session tomorrow at the same time. There was a question about what we will be going over. So super quickly, all the things that we said today that we didn't get to. We will be going over things like production stages tomorrow and how to convey that to potential supporters and collaborators. That's super important. We will be going over the funding sources workshop, handout. So I really encourage you to take a look at it today if you are interested. We will talk about the pluses and minuses and the trade-offs, what you gain and what you lose, which are not necessarily exactly the same as pluses and minuses for different funding sources. And we'll talk about things like the mental health resources handout, and we will have, as I said again, 30 more minutes for discussion. And then In 2 weeks' time, on September 20th, for those who have attended this workshop and tomorrow's presentation, we will have basically a project intake form for you to fill out, and we will be doing brief one-on-one consultations that will be viewable to everyone. So keep in mind, if you fill out the project intake form, you would like your project workshop, that the trade-off is that everybody else will also get to learn from your project consultation session with us. We are all doing this together. Again, the way that we've structured this series of sessions is to try to build power amongst filmmakers, amongst you who are attending. So with that, thank you so much, everybody who joined us. We are overwhelmed and really grateful for all of your attention. Yeah. Am I missing anything, Maria or Gabriella?
I would just like to add that the link for tomorrow should be the same as it is today. So you should also get a reminder for tomorrow, but if not, then just come back to the link that you used for today's session.
All right. Thank you all, everybody. We will leave you here and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
Thank
so much.
you.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.